Okay, DBC Youth, we are on our second to last Jonah video. This is actually the last Jonah video that's dealing with the last part of the book. And then next week, I'm going to do an overview of the whole book so we don't lose the forest for the trees. If you don't know what that means, then Google it. So we're going to be finishing the book today and making some observations, and there's some questions that are pretty, I think, just ones that I want you to reflect on and spend some time praying about and praying through and thinking through. Because the book itself, as we're going to see in Jonah today in Jonah, it ends with a question, and it ends with an open-ended question. So it's an ending that we don't really expect, and it's an ending that kind of leaves us hanging, and it's meant to do that so that we think about not only the whole book, but the question that God asks Jonah and how the book ends. So I'm going to start reading in verse 5 through 11. Hopefully this video is going to be a shorter one because I really want to get to the questions, make some observations along the way, and then we'll wrap it up next week with the overview. So, verse 5. Then Jonah went out from the city and sat east of it. Okay, now remember, real quick, Nineveh has repented and God has relented. Okay, so Nineveh has repented, God has relented. So Nineveh has repented from their evil, God is relented, and he is not bringing judgment upon them. And Jonah is very upset about this. So he is upset to the point of death. Okay, and so that happens earlier in chapter 4, and this is where we are now. So Jonah went out from the city and sat east of it, and there he made a shelter for himself, and he sat under it in the shade until he could see what would happen in the city. All right, it's as if like he's waiting for God to change his mind again and destroy the city. I don't know. Verse 6. So the Lord God appointed a plant. Now this next story is a little odd, okay, but we're going to see God is teaching Jonah a lesson about himself and about what Jonah values and what God values. But I'm going to highlight this here. The Lord God appointed a plant, okay? Appointed. And it grew up over Jonah to be a shade over his head to deliver him from his discomfort. And Jonah was extremely happy about the plant, okay? But God appointed, here we go again, God appointed a worm. So God appointed a plant, now God appoints a worm. And when dawn came the next day, and it attacked the plant, and it withered. So when the sun came up, God appointed, again, God is appointing. Remember, you want to look for repetition, especially in biblical narrative like Jonah. What is the author repeating? God appointed, God appointed, God appointed. So he appoints this scorching east wind, which just means like this hot wind coming in, and the sun is beating down on Jonah's head, so that he became faint and begged with all his soul to die, saying, "Death is better to me than life." Again, Jonah would rather die than rejoice in who God is and what he's been doing. Verse 9, then God said to Jonah, "Do you have good reason to be angry about the plant?" And he said, and this is Jonah speaking, "I have good reason to be angry, even to death." Then the Lord said, "You, Jonah, had compassion on the plant, for which you did not work and which you did not cause to grow, which came up overnight and perished overnight. Should I," God's referring to himself, "should I not have compassion on Nineveh, the great city in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know the difference between the right and left hand?" Basically, God's just saying, like, these people, they don't know any better. They're sinners and they're lost. So these 120,000 people, should I not have compassion on them as well as all of these animals that they have, right? So he's talking about this massive city full of people and animals. And God's saying, Jonah, you had compassion on this plant that you had nothing to do with, right? God's the one who appointed the plant. Jonah had nothing to do with it. And yet Jonah is showing compassion on this plant, but he is angry because God is showing compassion to the people of Nineveh. So God is really this whole section is, you can think of it like a parable, as this, it's like an enacted parable where God appoints this plant, he appoints the worm, he appoints the east wind, and he is acting out this parable for Jonah to show Jonah what he really cares about and how what Jonah cares about is not what God cares about. So that's what I want to go into the question, okay? And that's what really the whole book is getting at. What do we care about? Does it align with what God cares about? Okay, so let me clear everything here and go to the next page with the questions. The first question, this is really getting to the heart of the matter, okay, is that God values people over everything, even when we do not add any value to him, right? We bring nothing to the table. God values us because it's in his character to love us. Not because we're lovable, but because it is his character to pour out his love to us. So that's what God values. He values people. He values us. He values Nineveh. He values Jonah. He values Israel. But in the story, Jonah, he only values something. He values anything that adds value to him. Meaning Jonah will value people when those people add value to himself. Jonah will value a plant when that plant adds value to himself. Jonah will not value people when he perceives that they take away value from himself, like Nineveh. So the question that God is leaving Jonah with, and the author of Jonah is leaving us with, is what do you value? And that's a deep question, and that's a hard thing to think about. What do you truly value? And that's the second question kind of goes off of this. And I understand these are a little bit reflective and even philosophical, but these are important questions to think about. We don't think about this too often, but how can you tell what you value? So throughout the book, we can tell what God values and we can tell what Jonah values based on what they do, on what they worship, on what they desire. Again, God is valuing people. Jonah is valuing anything and everything that adds value to himself as he perceives it. So I want you to think about how can you tell what you value? And when you're looking at yourself, you know, your thoughts, your desires, what you're worshiping, what you're doing, that's going to tell you what you value. So the last question is the tough question. And this is the Christian life, right? This is what we're doing at becoming more and more like Christ, is how do you change what you value? Right, this is a tough question. And I want you to actually think about this. I don't want to just give an answer. There's a lot of answers to this, but how do you change what you value? So that's the book of Jonah. And next week, we're going to wrap up. I'm going to overview the whole book and show what's the point of this whole book and how is it fitting into the rest of the biblical story, and how is it pointing us to Christ. Okay, we've done that a little bit throughout. We're going to make it really explicit next week. So know that I love all of you, and just been enjoying getting to see you at these different gatherings we've had. And again, I want you to spend time thinking about this passage and these questions. Pray through them.